Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Jim Bischoff from Horizon. I am the Automation Director here. And I'm very excited about our partnership with MECCO and their direct part marking products. I wanted everyone to know that Horizon does have dot peen and laser marking equipment on Ethernet IP, and we have trained resources across our entire footprint to assist you with any opportunities or applications that you have. Either at our facility or the equipment is portable, we can bring it to you. As noted during the operator, if you have a question during about this 45-minute presentation, please chat those in. We'll review those at the end and answer them if we can. We are also recording this presentation, so if any of your coworkers or associates could not attend and you think it may be of value to them, please make them aware that if they go to the Horizon website, hs-e.com, they will find a link to this presentation later today. And if you do have questions after this presentation is over, you will see that Dave, Sweet, and I have our contact information available there as well. I would like to turn it over now to Dave Sweet. Dave is the president of MECCO, and he is going to walk through the presentation. So Dave, it's all to you.
All right, thank you, Jim. And just like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. As touted, we're going to be talking about traceability and achieving traceability with direct part marking. It's certainly a field that MECCO is an expert in, having served this industry for over 125 years, all in direct part marking and traceability. So today's presentation, we're really going to talk about some of the challenges that manufacturers today are facing, things that are perhaps disrupting our business or adverse events. We want to take a look at those, and we want to look at those from a perspective of how do we meet those adverse events? How do we minimize the impact of those on our business? And we want to look at those, and we want to look at how they relate to track and trace implementation. We want to look at how does track and trace help with those, help manufacturers deal with those adverse events, especially within a connected enterprise. We're also going to talk about traceability in general, traceability as a process, and we're going to walk through the 4 steps of traceability. And then at the end, we're going to wrap up with a few case studies showing you how manufacturers today have implemented track and trace within their processes and the benefits that they are seeing by implementing a track and trace system. So those are really the tenets of today's discussion. As Jim mentioned, at the end we certainly can have be ready to answer questions. So if you could chat those in at any time, that would be great as well. So let's get started. We'll get into really what are the challenges manufacturers are facing today. Certainly we're no secret, and we're seeing this in the headlines more and more, as certainly in the automotive industry. I think certainly recently with the airbag recalls, we're seeing vehicle recalls quite frequent certainly over the last year, and I think those numbers of recalls are, as we show here, increasing every year. And so how do we as manufacturers, especially those, whether it's in automotive, medical device, oil and gas, fabrication, how do we protect ourselves when we do have a a product recall? How can we mitigate those events so that they're not, we understand they certainly happen, but how do we contain those? How do we mitigate those so that they don't have a significant impact in our business? But we certainly are seeing that as a big challenge. We're working with manufacturers that when they do have a product recall, how do they handle that? How do they prevent that is really what they're asking across the board, is how do we prevent that? And we're going to walk you through some of the things from a track and trace standpoint that help with that. But we clearly can see in the industry today the number of vehicle recalls, the number of product recalls are certainly increasing. When we look at inventory, so this is it's a funny but not so funny slide where certainly as manufacturers today we are looking at how do we can control inventory. Where is our inventory, and do we have a good handle of that? Whether it's in warehouses, whether it's in work in process, do we know where our inventory is, and can we use track and trace to actually identify and potentially minimize the number of and quantity of inventory that we keep. But this is definitely clearly shows where when you don't have a track and trace and you cannot track your product, inventory costs go up. We see lost inventory go up, and we also see product being scrapped and or lost in the process. So we're definitely seeing more and more manufacturers looking at controlling their inventory. And the other challenge that we're working with a lot with our manufacturers is actually in counterfeiting. How do we know if our products are, that as a consumer we're buying are real or fake? How do we as manufacturers guard against those who are counterfeiting our products? And when we're working with manufacturers, we're seeing not just the simple process where someone may make a duplicate product and then go and sell that against our some of our customers. What we are seeing, and I'll highlight that in one of a leading electronics manufacturer, where their biggest counterfeiting problem is folks removing labels, removing product specifications, and then re-inking or labeling them different so that they can sell them at higher prices. And we had recently a major electronics manufacturer that said they were paying about 18 cents on the dollar to fight litigation because they are getting sued because their products are being put into applications that unfortunately counterfeiters are mislabeling, putting them into applications that then it can cause fire, can cause potential loss of equipment, of life. They're getting sued because they can't properly label their product and track that and trace that throughout their supply chain. And so they're fighting that litigation, and it's one where if they can control the counterfeiting process, they certainly can add a lot to their bottom line by implementing that control. And so when we look at, those are some of the highlights, but certainly as challenges for manufacturers today, we mentioned product recalls, we mentioned inventory control, we mentioned counterfeiting or authenticity of our parts, but certainly we're looking and working with manufacturers on mistake proofing processes. So we want to look at how can we track parts as they go through our process. Let's say if there is a 10-step process, how do we ensure that those parts go through all 10 steps and that we have a good known product? How do we, as we mentioned before, how do we reduce the number of product recalls to those that actually need to be recalled? I think we see in the vehicle automotive industry where the manufacturer may recall hundreds of thousands of vehicles. But could we actually just recall the specific units that need to be recalled and reduce that number from a few 100,000 down to maybe less than 5,000? And could that have a significant impact on our business? So those are the challenges that we're working with today's manufacturers to solve. And it really all centers around the implementation of a track and trace system. And that's really where we see manufacturers getting a tremendous benefit of being able to track and trace their product within a connected enterprise. And so I'll kind of walk you through not only track and trace, but we'll walk you through certainly the connected enterprise. What does that mean as well? So when we look at the connected enterprise, what we're referring to is some folks will say it's smart manufacturing. Some will say, especially in Europe, Industry 4.0. What we're talking about are really initiatives, mindset of manufacturing to make sure that we are collecting data, significant data, on the processes that we're implementing. And so when we look at a factory floor, we certainly know that I'll use some of my tools here. We certainly know at a higher level here that we have a manufacturing database or a corporate network that is feeding data down to the manufacturing floor. And when we look at the manufacturing floor, we're looking at not only servers, but we're looking at controllers, we're looking at devices such as robotics, motion controllers, marking equipment would be things that are on the manufacturing floor. So we're looking at devices, and we're trying to connect those devices back up into the manufacturing database. And so when we refer to connected enterprise, we're talking about this entire factory floor being connected bidirectionally. So not only from the manufacturing database down to the manufacturing floor, but also being able to send information from the manufacturing floor back to the enterprise or database software. And so when we look at this, what we really focus in on is we understand the connected enterprise, but then we also understand where does traceability fit within that connected enterprise. So in this example, what we're really showing is how does information or data go bidirectionally from enterprise software down to the manufacturing floor. And we use an example here of a laser where we are imprinting a barcode. And so what we show is in the manufacturing world, there are relatively two different sides of the production. We have we have the PC side and we have the PLC side, and those are the two sides of communication that we typically will see in a manufacturing setting. On the PC side, that's where we'll use communication protocols such as serial communication, Ethernet, TCP, IP, ActiveX control, that sends information back and forth from the main PC or server down to the marking device and back. But then we also work with manufacturers to then connect that PC to the enterprise software using third-party software, but that we're configuring to send data back and forth. A lot of that is typically done through database sharing of information. Typically, we are looking towards a database to export information, typically in a spreadsheet, that we are then reading and writing to that spreadsheet the data that we are marking and providing pass-fail information back to the database. And so that's typically the transfer of information on the PC side. But for a lot of our manufacturers, it's really down to the PLC side. How do we connect the PLC side to this information communication protocol? So when we look at the laser and or dot peen connecting to the PLC, in the past it's all strictly been through discrete I/O. Typically, you have proprietary software resident on your marking device, and then your PLC will just send discrete I/O commands to the marker to initiate marking sequence. But we had really no easy way to send dynamic information to that marking device. It was all done with proprietary software. And so what MECCO worked on was actually developing a all Ethernet IP communication protocol, which is definitely a shift in technology from what has traditionally been a Windows-based platform. And so what MECCO has done is really solve the problem of how do you get information, dynamic information from the PLC to the marking device? How do we get that information flowing? In the past, it really has only been through discrete I/O. So there's really been no dynamic information. But what MECCO did is worked on a package what we call EtherMark, but using native Ethernet IP communication to send that data back and forth between the PLC and the laser. And what's really nice about this technology, it allows the manufacturing personnel, especially manufacturing engineers, to create and maintain and support that data transfer. So in the past where we would have to get IT and software engineers involved, now we're actually able to use RS Logix to set up the bidirectional communication and speak directly to the laser or dot peen device without having to learn their proprietary software. So all of the controls, all of the dynamic information back and forth between the units is all done through Ethernet IP. So MECCO provides an add-on profile. It provides an add-on instruction so that manufacturing engineers can quickly connect and then set up that communication stream back and forth between the marking device and the laser. So that's definitely a shift we see in the industry and how we want to make sure that that information is going back and forth in the easiest and most simple process. So that certainly solves the information from the PLC to the laser, but then certainly there's getting information from the PLC to the enterprise software. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the third-party packages that are configurable. So things like FactoryTalk or OPC client server or Kepware, where we're setting that information or communication line so that we're setting up that line to communicate back and forth between the PLC and the enterprise software. But that whole diagram really shows you the full traceability of information going back and forth from the marking device, which is the manufacturing floor, all the way up to the enterprise software. So let's now focus, now that we kind of understand the connected enterprise, let's focus in on traceability in itself. So traceability, it is a process, and it's a process for locating components and their history throughout the life of that product. And so when we look at traceability, we look at really four major parts to traceability. We look at part identification, which is what information are we trying to put on that part? Is it a serial number, lot number, date code? What information do we need on that part? We also look at the marking method. Certainly MECCO is experts in direct part marking, laser and dot peen, but we also understand there are other technologies, ink, labels, tags. What is the appropriate marking method? And we'll walk you through some of the criteria that we use when we're working with our customers to figure out what is the right marking technologies. So the third is definitely reading and verifying that data. So how do we not only mark the part, but how do we use those barcodes and information so that we can scan that part as it goes through operations in our process? And then last is about data. And we talked a little bit certainly about the data of transferring that information back and forth, but that's definitely the significant part of how do we use real-time data to make decisions that, that allow us to improve efficiencies, again, reduce the number of man-hours on recalls, reduce inventory, error-proof that process. How do we use that data to get and make those types of decisions? So those are really the four steps in that process, and we're going to walk through each of those steps to really highlight what's most important for you as a manufacturer in those key steps. So the first one, as we mentioned, is part identification. And it really comes through serialization. We want to create a unique identifier on that part that is specific to that part. A lot of times we'll refer to it in common terms of a license plate or a birthmark or a date code. We're trying to put a information that is definitely unique to that part. And a lot of that certainly is done through serialization. How do we serialize those parts so that they have a unique identifier? But you also want to start looking at, if you have a serial number, what other information do you need on that part? Do you need the part number? Do you need the date code? Do you need the lot code? Do you need all of those codes? Or is there other information that's important to you? Those are the things that as a group you have to kind of walk through and say, what's the most critical information that we should have on those parts? One of the things that we certainly will talk to when we're in that initial stage with our customers, a lot of them will say, what information is most important? We always say serial number. You have to have that unique identifier. But really it's up to you, and it's also up to your end user to dictate what that information is. And that's what we really try to highlight here is you want to look at what's the marking compliance standards that maybe your industry has. So we'll look at ISO standards, MIL Spec 3000, ATA Spec 2000 is in aerospace. But when we look at traceability, we're seeing all the major industries, aerospace, automotive, medical device, pharmaceutical, all having their own specifications on the information that should be on a part and how that information is then put on that part. So we always stress to our customers, we want to understand where is this product going, who is the end user, and what specifications do they have, and it might be regulatory specifications that they may have that you might have to comply to. But when we look at that, we're always looking at, once we decide what information do we need on those parts, then we look at how do we apply, in what form do we apply that information? Is it simply human readable? So maybe it's a human readable serial number because we just need that information to be human readable, or do we need to put that information in a barcode? And so I think we all can understand the commercial 1D barcode. Typical linear barcodes are things that you see in the supermarket, in packaging. A lot of times we'll see those 1D barcodes, and that's what we've been using, I would say, over the last 20 years is 1D barcodes. But certainly over the last, I'd say, last 5 years has been the emergence of the 2D barcode. And so I'll give you some of the, the pros and cons of each of those barcodes. So a 1D barcode certainly is very common, very easy to read with simple line scanners. You can input information, but some of the challenges that you have is as you increase the amount of information or text that you want to put in that barcode, you then have to increase the size of that barcode. Some other properties of that 1D barcode, you have to have black on white or white on black error contrast, or excuse me, black and white contrast so that you can get a good code. But unfortunately, if you destroy any part of that code, you can then not read that code. And so those are some of the shortcomings that we've seen with 1D barcodes. That's where and why the industry is really moving towards 2D barcodes. 2D barcodes can hold a lot more information. I think they can simply hold, I think, greater than 256 characters in a single barcode. What's really nice about a 2D barcode is that they can get quite small. We have customers reading 2D barcodes that are 1 millimeter square. So you can have a really compact code with a lot of information contained in that code. The nice thing about the 2D barcode is it's very robust. It actually has redundant information so that if you destroy part of that barcode, you'll actually still be able to read that barcode because it has redundancy in that code. And then really the only downside on the 2D barcode, but this is becoming less and less of a downside, is 2D barcodes need a camera to read those. And in the past, that camera has been quite expensive. But what we are seeing in the industry is those 2D barcode readers are, because they're becoming more and more common, the volume of units are going up, those 2D barcodes are actually coming down in price to be very competitive with your traditional 1D barcode scanner. So those are some of the things that we'll work with customers on in this first initial step. We'll work with them on what information do they want, what compliance standards do they need to meet, and then how do we put that information into a form. Is it human readable? Is it barcode? Is it both? Those are really the three things that we'll work with those customers in that first stage. So once we have the part identification, we'll then next move to marking method. We're going to talk about the direct part marking methods of laser marking and dot peen. Certainly, when we look at laser marking is definitely the highest contrast type marking, and dot peen is definitely more of the deep type marking. Laser is becoming more and more recognizable as the source that provides the highest contrast, but it certainly comes at a slightly higher price than a traditional dot peen marker, which is traditionally what we call a pin type marker. And so those are the technologies that we'll walk through the customer kind of exploring what types of what's the right technology. So we have laser, we have dot peen. As I mentioned before, there's also other marking methods such as labels and inks, tags. And what we'll work with the customer is to really understand, what are they, what are the things that they're going to facing, or what things are they facing that will affect what technology we'll use. So we'll look at environments. We'll want to know, are these clean room environments? Are they environments where there's a lot of dirt and debris? Are they environments of high temperature, high heat? Those are the things that that we'll look at. So, for example, if we're in a foundry where we're marking red hot materials, laser equipment's probably not the best choice since it's heavy electronics, whereas the dot peen is much more, I think, temperature resistant, and we have different options where we can water cool those units, but that's where we'll make a determination if it's a really hot application. That's where we would find dot peen might be the best suitable technology. But we'll also look at surface quality. Is it a machined part? Is it a cast part? Are those parts dry? Are they oily? We've worked with manufacturers that have been labeling oily parts for years and complaining that when they send their parts out to a customer, the customer says, I open up the box and I find all of the labels at the bottom of the box, not on the parts. So if we have oily parts, we can't use labels or we can't use ink. That's where direct part marking has a definite advantage. We'll look at the materials. Is it metals? Is it plastic? Is it cardboard? What are the materials that we can mark? Traditionally, fiber or lasers are used for marking metals, plastics, cardboard, but we'll want to look at different wavelengths depending on the materials. Certainly, if it's heavy metals, that's definitely where we'll use a lot of dot peen as well. But we'll look at the materials to understand what's the right technology. What's the life expectancy of the part? We don't want to apply the best and most expensive mark if this is a low-cost piece that maybe your traceability demands are really only if that part ever comes back. And so we want to look at what is the life expectancy of the part. If it's a long expectancy, yes, we want the most durable mark. So we'll want to look at that. We'll look at space and location of barcode, as I mentioned before. If you have a small part, 1D barcode might not be the best code. That's where we want to look at putting a 2D barcode on that part. And the last is connectivity to the factory floor. We definitely want to look at how do you want to integrate this machine, and is that that will definitely influence the type of technology that you will choose in that marking method. And so I put up a diagram here of connectivity to the factory floor. We want to go with units that, again, from a traceability side, that can communicate back and forth. And we want those, we show a picture of a laser here, but we want our laser and our dot peen equipment to look like every other piece of equipment on the factory floor. And right now what we see in the industry is that MECCO is really the only company providing Ethernet IP, full native Ethernet IP communications, but we're seeing like labels and inks where it's all serial communication. That is cumbersome, and definitely where we see folks will make a decision of, hey, we want the best technology with the best communication and integration possibilities, and that's where they'll go with direct part marking with Ethernet IP. So we talked about part identification. We talked about technologies for marking. The third piece is reading and verification. And this is really most important because when we mark those barcodes, we want to make sure that the information that we are marking in those barcodes is valid. We want to make sure what we marked is what we commanded to be marked. So we want to make sure that we verify the information in that code. We want to prevent serial number duplication, so we want to make sure we're reading those code and making sure that two serial numbers did not get printed on two different pieces of, or two different components. We also want to look at the grade of that barcode. What's really nice is that the camera systems out there can actually grade the quality of those codes. So we want high quality codes that are going to last throughout your process. So that's definitely where we'll see, as I mentioned before, we want to look at the environments that we're in. We want to have barcodes that are the highest quality so that we can continue to read those codes not only in the factory, but certainly when they're out into the customer base and or they come back to the factory. We want to be able to read those barcodes. So we always look at grading those codes and making sure that they're of high quality, A or B grade codes. And then we want to log that information into the database. But we show some examples of good versus bad marks. We want to prevent any bad marks from getting out onto the factory floor that could eventually not be readable. So implementing those scanners and readers is really mission critical in that third step of traceability. And here are some of the ID compliance that we had mentioned before. And when we look at the process of data collection and really kind of transitioning from reading and verifying, then putting information in data, I kind of use this example of really data collection and where we see most manufacturers implementing really the essence of that track and trace system. So in the process, we'll be marking those barcodes on those parts. And what we'll see here is that we'll mark at a component level, and we're scanning that barcode as that part goes through each step in the operation. So we verify that that part has gone through the process so that in case, let's perhaps say there was an opportunity where we had to clear the line, or an operator made a mistake and took a part from station number 2 and moved it to station number 5. We want to make sure that we guard against that. So we want to make sure that we're scanning this barcode at all of the essential operations or steps in that process. So we're constantly scanning those barcodes and ensuring that that information then gets sent to the database so that it can regulate and ensure that those parts are going through every step in the process. But then once we are at the component level, the next thing that we'll jump up to is the subassembly level. And this is where we're actually taking a lot of, let's say, this block, and we are then starting to tie other individual barcodes to that main subassembly. And that's where we'll start to create what we call parent-child relationships. So we'll have one main assembly barcode, and then as we are assembling those parts, those barcodes are getting scanned in during the assembly process, and we're creating a library of parent-child relationships so that we know and identify every single component in that subassembly. And then the next step is really on the full assembly. And so we typically will use the automotive industry as it's I think the most relatable, is we'll then tie all of those barcodes to the master VIN number. And this is where really traceability comes to life, where you have whether we call it a VIN number or a main level part number, whether it's in medical device as well. But we have a main product number that we now have all of the parts that make up that assembly. And that is where we see tremendous amount of benefits, is because we're collecting all of that data and registering that to a single VIN number or single product identification number. And we're creating those data collection points all throughout our process. And the next thing we'll just talk about is, a lot of customers will say, hey, we understand the principle of traceability, but how do we incrementally step into that traceability? And that's where we'll work with customers in implementing discrete tracking systems. And so one of the partners that we work with is Rockwell. And we'll work with Rockwell and our customers of implementing a track and trace system using their factory talk transaction manager or historian, where they're using recognized third-party software that can be configured to their specific process. And that's where we're leveraging Rockwell products. We're leveraging the connectivity that MECCO already has on the manufacturing floor, and we're using that factory talk so that it can actually do all of that data collection. And that's where we can start to use that information to make real-time decisions. So if we know parts are skipping steps in the process, we can stop those parts from getting shipped out to a customer. If those parts are in containment, we can identify those parts and make sure that those never ever get a shipping label and head out to our customers. So those are the things that we're using that data to make some real-time decisions on the factory floor. But we're using something like a discrete tracking system like Factory Talk so that we can not only incrementally deploy this maybe in a cell, but then we can scale that across the factory and at multiple factories. And that's one of the things that what we'll see is a lot of folks will use maybe homegrown implementations and or hire third-party software companies to develop proprietary solutions. That can work, but we are very much in favor of using industry standards that can then be configured for your application. This is just another chart here, again, really showing what I was mentioning before. How can we tie all components, and in this case to the VIN number? And it's about serialization, having that unique identifier, tracking that product through the manufacturing process, tracking that history or recording that history from cradle to grave of that product, creating that genealogy of that part relative to its subassemblies and main assemblies, and then provide that real-time tracking information back and forth from the factory floor to the enterprise software so that we can guard against and protect on containments, error-proofing that process, inventory. Those are all the things that you're going to get cost benefits and things that will definitely drop to the bottom line when you're able to bring those events to a much more manageable size. So those are the serialization and traceability process. What I'll move next is to kind of go over some of the case studies. So we presented two here. So this is one where this is the automotive industry. This is a customer that was looking to identify their parts. They were labeling these parts with a stick-on label, but these are parts that get formed. They have coolant on those parts, and those labels were getting destroyed. But they needed to be able to take that part and raw material before any operations, identify that, and then make sure it goes through every single step in the process, and eventually tie all of that data to the VIN number. And so what we worked with them on, this was a laser marking application where they wanted that permanent mark, high contrast, so they could read it in all types of environments, because it was in the first step when it gets marked, it's pristine. But at the end of the process, it's bent, it's formed, it's covered in coolant. Can they still read that barcode? And that's where we decided to go with a laser marking solution for them. And so what this customer then did was they looked at actually implementing an inline solution. So one of the challenges you do have in laser is laser safety. So we want to make sure that we have a laser safe environment where no potential for operator interaction with the laser beam. So we developed a system that actually vacuum seals to the part. So this piece here indexes in and back and forth to join to the part to create a vacuum seal and then laser mark. The big challenge for them too was the information. This is a manufacturing floor. They don't have software engineers that write .NET VB code readily available. So they wanted to have something, a communication protocol, all based upon Ethernet IP. And so that's where we used our EtherMark platform so that they can quickly, instead of taking 80 man-hours to develop software, they were able within a few hours connect and start communicating back and forth to that laser. And then they stationed cameras at every critical op in the process, and then they stored all of that data in the enterprise software. So that was case study number one. Number two was a biomedical medical device manufacturer that requires full traceability on each part. As we can all recognize and hope, since we are in essence consumers of these products, we want to make sure that there is full traceability. And so FDA governs that for medical device manufacturers, and they want to make sure that mission critical, since a lot of these components, whether in this case it's a connector on a catheter or hip replacements, knee replacements, are all going through the correct processes. And so for this customer, they wanted to make sure that what we call right part, right mark. They wanted to make sure that they took the operator out of the process as much as possible. They wanted to make sure that every single component had a unique serial number. And they wanted to make sure all of that information got back and forth between the factory floor and the enterprise software. And so what we worked with them on is the right part, right mark. So we worked on a station that we marked, when they put in the part, we actually with vision verify that it is the correct part that's loaded. We then will look at the part to find X, Y, and theta geometry so that we can adjust our marking so that we mark perfectly on that part. We then read the barcode, and then we look at the individual characters with OCR to make sure what we marked is exactly what was told to be marked. And we verify and validate all that information so that before we open that door and that part is taken out of this process, that part is 100% inspected and guaranteed that that information is correct. And so that is a system that we implemented and we call the right part, right mark. And this is definitely we see in the automotive industry, medical device, oil and gas, where you absolutely have to ensure that that information is correct and valid. And these are the results that our manufacturers are seeing. We're seeing, this is the information received from our automotive customers. So this is one where this plant makes cylinder heads. And what they showed is, in talking to their traceability guru, what they showed is that this particular customer was able to reduce by, let's say on average, 85% reduction in the number of vehicles needed to be recalled because they knew exactly what vehicles needed to be recalled and what VIN numbers. So because they know specifically what parts need to be recalled, what VIN numbers need to be recalled, they were able to reduce that down by 85%. And then the subsequent, they were able to reduce the number of man hours. So they're not only fixing good cars, but they're also not calling all of those vehicles in, but they're only fixing the vehicles that need to be repaired. So they are able to reduce the number of man hours. And in talking to that traceability guru, we often will ask, what's the return on investment that you guys calculate to figure out, do you implement a traceability process, what they will always say is, we stopped calculating the ROI because every time we did the cost savings and benefits, the cost savings alone always had lots of zeros and at least 2 commas. So they always knew that they were going to save millions of dollars by implementing track and trace on every single component. And the next one we share is the one with Rockwell. So not only does Rockwell preach the connected enterprise, but they also follow it. And what they've shown is through track and trace, being able to properly identify parts, they're able to reduce inventory because they know exactly where their inventory is. They know when it goes out. They can track that at all times. They can increase quality, reduce lead times, reduce their capital expenditures 30% per year because they're in full control of their operations. And so that's some of the things that they've been sharing about how they're transforming their business and affecting their bottom line by implementing track and trace. So again, as we wrap up, why traceability in the connected enterprise? It's about real-time manufacturing data. It's about error-proofing that process, increasing our quality. It's about containment control, part authenticity. It's about supply chain management, inventory control. It's really about improving our processes, optimizing those so that we can guard against adverse events. And if those do happen, we can contain those events and really reduce the number of man hours and eventually the cost that we might have to implement or put towards those adverse events. And that's what MECCO is really working with our customers now, is really putting those track and trace systems to really handle all of those different events. So this is where we open up for questions. As I mentioned, if you could chat any of those questions or any of the feedback or anything that we have gone over that may be clarified, we're definitely here to answer those. As Jim said, at a later time, if you want to email us, we certainly can help and work with you to answer some of those questions.
Hi, Dave. It's Denise. We do have a few chat questions and the time to take those. One of the first questions we got from one of the guests was, other laser marking manufacturers advertise having Ethernet IP. What makes the MECCO system different?
Sure, that's a great question. For the last decade, our customers have been begging for the industry to go to an Ethernet IP-based solution. And that's where MECCO set off 3 years ago to really develop that. And what we determined was a lot of competitors were advertising Ethernet IP, but they actually thought that was they're actually broadcasting that they had Ethernet TCP IP, which is obviously very different than IP. So they're advertising the Internet protocol where we are advertising industrial protocol. So we've seen some confusion there, and I guess I can see that with the names being so close together. But then we're also seeing customers that have Ethernet IP adapters, but that means you still have a lot of work to do. You still have to understand that if you're a machine builder, you have to be able to understand that manufacturer's custom API. You have to become very well adversed in their API. You're going to have to write software code just to make that adapter work. But with MECCO, that's not the case. We've done all the hard work. We've worked in conjunction with Rockwell, and that's why we are recognized as the only marking company in the world that has Encompass partner recognition for our marking devices with Ethernet IP. So we've worked with Rockwell to produce add-on profiles, add-on instructions so that you easily can download those to your PLC and start communicating with that software. And that's the big difference. People are advertising, hey, we have Ethernet IP. But when you really peel away and look under the hood, it's a lot of work for the integrators because it's just an adapter It's not the full-fledged software. And I think as we go along too, I think we'll see folks improving it, but they're doing it without Rockwell's assistance, which to me is it's never going to be robust as the solution that we have with Rockwell, because it's constantly evolving. It's things that we're constantly adding features to, and so those are some of the things that we see in the industry.
Thank you. The next question is, you mentioned real-time manufacturing data. How will traceability affect my assembly machine cycle time?
Yeah, I think when you see the effects, certainly can come in different forms. So when you look at, I think there's a big myth in the industry that labels and ink are the most cost-effective and the best types of marking when you look at their initial investment. But what we show with manufacturers is that that's a myth. When you're in any high volume, 100,000 parts or more, ink and labels are 7 to 9 cents a mark. When we look at laser and dot peen, you're talking 1 to 2 cents a mark. And so when you say cycle time, applying those laser marks and dot peen marks can be faster than those inks and labels at times, but certainly the quality goes up. And when you're trying to track and trace those products, when you're trying to struggle finding and reading a label and or ink that type system that you're constantly getting up working again after a weekend of being down and labor dedicated to that, you definitely see the advantages of direct part marking up over those. But definitely, I think it is the real-time adverse events. Is that by implementing that traceability, you're definitely decreasing the amount of time and energy that you're spending on those adverse events. And I think that's where we see when manufacturers are collecting that data, they're understanding that data, then they're able to really control and optimize their process.
The next question, Dave, is this guest asks, I've used laser markers in the past, and they were down a lot and expensive to get up and running. Is this still the case?
Yeah, I think that's not knowing specifically what markers. I would just say from a general standpoint, what we've seen over the last 10 years is breakthrough technology in laser systems. 10, 15 years ago, lasers were seen as a really unique marking device, something that was, yes, hard to maintain. The technology back then we used, from a common sense, we used light bulbs. So we call those lasers flash lamp lasers. So you're constantly changing that technology out every 500 to 1,000 hours. So there's a consumable side. But you really needed to understand your optics. As an end user, you had to be able to maintain those systems, clean them. They were water cooled, and yeah, they were definitely temperamental machines. But as we've seen over the last, especially over the last 8 years, the emergence of fiber technology, so that you go from a large machine down to something that can sit on your desk. It's now, instead of being 208 three-phase water-cooled machines, we're seeing machines that are air-cooled and plug into 110, your standard outlet. And from a technology side, it's all plug-and-play units. So let's say if a laser were to go down, it's as simple as taking that laser out and putting a new source in. So one of the advantages of MECCO is we stock all components. So if you have a laser go down, we're just simply taking your laser out, putting our service loaner in, and get you back up and running as quickly as possible. And then we're repairing that type of a machine back in a clean room environment. So the technology has progressed so that, one, it's much, much more reliable. You're talking diode lifetimes of 100,000 or greater. So you're not having to use bulbs or change out bulbs to keep these lasers running. They'll run 24/7, 365, and just plain run. But you're also looking at when they do have an event, it's so quick and easy to plug and play device now to get those machines back up and running. So that's where we see a lot of manufacturers that were using some of those old technologies initially be fearful of, hey, I don't want to get into another situation where I'm just constantly maintaining this equipment. That's not the story now. We have a lot of manufacturers that are using these in all types of environments, 24/7, 365, and they're extremely reliable pieces of equipment.
Dave, we have time for one last question, and this guest would like to know, do you also offer EtherCAT for Omron?
We've been in development for EtherCAT for Omron, but we don't have a solution now. I believe we've done on one of the systems we had, I think an Omron PLC had an Ethernet IP device, which we worked with them to get that working on their PLC, but it definitely was not EtherCAT. That is one of the communication protocols that we're working on. So we've done Ethernet IP. We've also done Profinet. We have done Modbus TCP. So those are some of the things that we've done now, and EtherCAT is definitely on our R&D list of next communication protocols.
Well, that's all we have time for today. We do really appreciate everybody's time and attendance, and if you have any questions, feel free to shoot Dave or Jim an email or give us a call. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. Have a wonderful day.